Hi there. My name is Simpson McLellan, and I'm an award-winning Canadian children's author. I wanted to share a fascinating literacy initiative with you that I conducted over a 3-year period from 2015 to 2017 with over 1,700 primary students from 32 schools in every province and territory of Canada and 4 classes from Melbourne, Australia. Let me give you a quick overview of what the project was about, how it worked, and the fantastic impact it had on students. I also wanted to give you an opportunity to take part in a version of this literacy project with the children in your life. And at the end of this video, I'll show you how to do that. Let's start with a brief description of the project. The Christmas Wind Story Project challenged students from JK to grade 6 to listen to a story in a format akin to an old serialized radio show. Each week for 8 weeks, an audio portion of the story was uploaded to their class webpage, and they were asked to illustrate what they imagined. The book they drew pictures of was not yet on the shelves. The actual book was launched in December 2017, so the students had a clean, uninfluenced slate to start from. Fueled by my desktop computer in Newmarket, Ontario, this project brought students back in time to when things were ungoogleable and wonder and wait weren't foreign words. In its simplest terms, though, the way the program worked is that children listened to the words of a story and then drew what they imagined. But let's break that down a bit because the project ended up being many things. Firstly, it was a social experiment, because it basically unplugged the students involved. Ironically, we used digital technology to bring kids back in time to when computers didn't exist. It was like a serialized radio show. To quote CBC, who covered the project in many provinces across the country, the Christmas Wind Story Project is all about the power of sound and listening. The project was also like a pause button, in the sense that no binge listening was possible. The students had to wait a week for each new episode to air, which created suspense and drama and connection for them. The project was also like a combination of time travel and fortune telling, in that we asked students to travel back 3/4 of a century to when not even television existed, to draw and thus predict what would happen in the story. It was also about the lost art of visualization. Did you know that recent science has uncovered that there are no less than 12 regions of the brain that must come together to enable the complex task of imagining? That's what was so cool about this project. In an age where you could Google everything, anywhere, this project was ungoogleable because the illustrations simply didn't yet exist. Think of it this way. Few of us have to wonder or ponder about very much these days because the answer to most big and small questions is a mere mouse click away. And of course, that's wonderful because it puts learning at our fingertips, but it also means we often skip the step of trying to figure out something on our own. So think about this. If wonder is the mother of discovery, and discovery is the fuel that takes us to new frontiers, what would happen if our kids lost the wonder gene? Finally, the Christmas Wind Story Project was about connection. And this is one of the reasons teachers were so eager to embrace the project and wedge it into their curriculum. It connected students with literature. It connected them with other schools. If you visit the website at christmaswindstoryproject.com, you'll see the fascinating ways we did this, through trading cards and pen pal letters, through sharing each other's illustrations, and so on. The project also connected them with an author, me, as during the live project the kids were able to communicate with me in a number of ways, through my website, two-way comments, a voicemail app, little movies that were made of their illustrations, and more. Again, you can learn more at christmaswindstoryproject.com. Finally, the project connected them to their visualization skills. and with the writer and illustrator within each of them. Now, I've compiled some of the outcomes of this story project that are just too good not to share on this webpage, christmaswindstoryproject.com, and I encourage you to visit. While there, you can see lots of the kids' illustrations. You can hear the voicemail messages they sent me, listen to the CBC podcasts, and read the newspaper coverage of the project, view teachers' comments, and the trading cards that the kids passed around. You can also access a summary presentation I gave which shared some really fascinating insights, such as this. Firstly, the broad and wonderfully different visuals created by the students after hearing the very same words. And on the flip side, startlingly similar illustrations created by students from vastly different backgrounds and geography. Now briefly, the premise of the story itself is that a little girl named Jo is leaving with her sick mother Mary and infant brother Christopher for someplace else on a cold, windy, and snowless Christmas Eve. Along the way, the ferocious wind pushes them around, forcing them to stop for the night to hide out in the barn of a notoriously grouchy old man named Franklin Murdoch. The wind causes all manner of havoc for poor Jo, including one incident at the beginning where the wind whisks away her scarf. I found it fascinating how gripped the children were by this incident. In the words of one grade 2 student, her illustration depicts, quote, "When the scarf gets blown away, it's colorful and it was a pretty thing when she said it." I have literally thousands of illustrations of Jo's scarf as it's stolen by the wind, and interestingly, in these thousands of illustrations from across the country, with no prompting, in most cases, the scarf is red. Also interesting is that the book's real illustrator, Brooke Kerrigan, also drew the scarf as red. One more quick observation. Whether they're aware of it or not, each student brought something of themselves to this project, the way we all bring something of ourselves to the books that we read. Some of it had to do with regional diversity, in other words, their exterior landscape, where they lived, but their interior landscape, their paradigm and emotional framing was also at play. Here's some quick examples. Landscape elements made it easy to guess the student's home province in some cases. Labrador, where there are no roads and travel is by skidoo. Toronto, with its skyscrapers. The mountains of BC. The farms and fields of the prairies. The Stelco smokestacks of Hamilton. When I read the line, quote, "The day before Christmas and still no snow, she should have been glad, but the skinny road seemed colder without it." In Ontario and BC, the skinny road was paved. In Labrador, it was a path. One cool thing was highlighted by a teacher in Makkovik, Labrador, a village with a population of a couple of hundred and no cars at all. There's a line in the story that says, "Her plan was to be on a bus halfway to someplace else by now, but they weren't even close to the station." When this teacher from Makkovik shared her students' illustrations with me, she remarked, "We listened to part one again one more time to be sure we had a good idea of what to draw. Some of them had a great idea, but a lot of them got stuck on the concept of the bus. Funny seeing as there are no buses in Makkovik." As mentioned, the interior landscape they brought to the process was just as interesting and lots of fun. One of the things we asked the students to do after they'd finished listening to and drawing pictures of the whole story was to draw a picture of what they thought would happen next, after the last words of the story. The various predictions of what happens next were both wide and wild. There were the Harlequin romance versions where Mary and Mr. Murdoch got married, even though he's meant to be many, many years older than she. Some imagined they all packed up and went to Florida or Hawaii. Some brought in detectives to take down Mr. Murdoch for stealing the baby. There were even a couple that added some Stephen King horror elements to a predictive ending. Spider-Man made an entrance, as did unicorns, the Lone Ranger, even alligators and dinosaurs. If the goal was to tap into these kids' imaginations, we certainly did that. One of the things that surprised and delighted me was how some of them so eloquently got to the heart of the story, sharing things like, "Christopher got a spoon, but the best gift was of the time that they had together." And, "They are opening their presents. Mr. Murdoch has not had a happy Christmas in so long." In other words, these students displayed some pretty mature understanding and empathy, which was lovely. So impactful was this project that I ended up dedicating the book to the 32 schools who participated. Just as wonderful, in a different way, were the exquisite illustrations by the book's actual illustrator, Brooke Kerrigan. The book's scheduled launch was twice delayed. Originally to be published in mid-2015, it didn't actually reach stores until December 2017, just before Christmas. But the wait was worth it. Brooke's illustrations are gorgeous, and Red Deer Press created a very beautiful book. What I'd like to share next is 3 short sections to give you a fuller sense of the project. First is a portion of the video I shared with students before they started the actual work to explain to them how the project was going to work. Next is a video compilation of student illustrations from every province and territory to a soundtrack of the story up to part 5. And lastly is a video created with a lovely grade 2 class from Lennoxville, Quebec, where the students voiced some part of the story themselves. Basically, they sent me voice clips via an app on my website, and I spliced them into the story's narration and used their illustrations throughout, including a What Happens Next section. I hope you enjoy watching.
Hi, this is Stephanie McLellan, and I've had the pleasure of presenting to students in schools all across Canada, from British Columbia to Labrador. My books include The Chicken Cat and Leon's Song. I've also written 2 books called Hoogie in the Middle and Tweezle into Everything about little monsters called Hoogie, Tweezle, and Pumpkin. Well, I have a brand new story coming out this fall called The Christmas Wind. This story is so new that there aren't even final pictures for it yet. The illustrator, Brooke Kerrigan, is just working on the pictures herself right now in her office, which is across the ocean in France. I thought it would be fun to engage you in a little experiment, which is kind of like a combination of time travel and fortune telling. In other words, it's a combination of traveling back in time in order to tell the future. The only qualification you'll need to take part in this experiment is a powerful imagination. Let me explain what I have in mind. As I've said, while the illustrator for The Christmas Wind is working on ideas for the pictures in this book, they're all in her head right now, and I haven't seen any of them. So right now, at this point in time, all that exists are my words. I say time travel for this reason. Everyone today is connected. It's easy to watch a movie or TV program anywhere, even on our phones. But as you may know, it didn't used to be this way. Not really so long ago, there wasn't even such a thing as television. I grew up with a TV, but kids even just 10 years older than me didn't. When I went to university, I used a typewriter because personal computers didn't even exist then. So how did people entertain themselves back then? Well, they read books, and they went to movies and plays, but they also entertained themselves with radio shows. So instead of sitting down and watching a TV or computer screen, both kids and adults would sit in front of a radio and listen to stories. Now, as you know, a radio only makes sound, not pictures, so they had to imagine the pictures in their heads. Do you think you could do that? Would you like to try? I'm betting the answer to my first question is yes, and I'm hoping the answer to my second question is yes too. So here's what I'd like to do. Before the Christmas wind is illustrated, I'd like you to just listen to the words of the story and then draw pictures of the images you see in your heads. Over the next few weeks, each week, I'm going to release another part of the story for your class to listen to on my website, just like people used to do with stories on radio shows. There will only be 3 schools in the whole world taking part in this experiment over the next few weeks. One in a small Newfoundland town called Pollard's Point, one just down the road from me in Newmarket, Ontario, and one across the ocean and thousands of miles away from me in Melbourne, Australia. Only your school and these other 2 schools will have secret access to these recordings that the average person won't. It's in a secret area of my website that only your school and the other 2 schools will be able to access. So again, what I'd like to challenge you to do is to close your eyes as I read you the story and imagine the pictures in your head, and then I want you to draw what you imagine and send it to me. I wonder if what you will imagine will be different from others in your class. I wonder if what your class will imagine will be different from what students in other parts of the world imagine. Once I receive your drawings, I'll put them up on my website so you can see them there. Eventually, I'll share with you the illustrations drawn by the other classes in different parts of the world, and ultimately, when I get some actual illustrations from the illustrator, I'll put some of these up on my site too. But for your eyes only, you'll have a secret pass to see this. To thank you for participating in this little experiment, once the real book is finished this fall, I'll send a free copy for your school library. Okay, so let's get started. As you'll see, the first part of the story is already up on the webpage I created especially for your school. There will be 8 parts of the story in all, and I hope you enjoy it. To hear the first part of the story, just click on the button that says The Christmas Wind, Part 1. The wind shoved Jo sideways, stealing feeling from her fingers and toes. It chased her with ghostly moans and creepy shrieks. The day before Christmas, and still no snow. She should have been glad, but the skinny road seemed colder without it. Jo hitched her baby brother higher on her hip. Leaving was the right thing to do, but the timing was bad. Her mother's eyes were slippery and her forehead shiny, and Christopher was still so new. The wind elbowed Jo's mother and kicked her to the ground. "Stop it!" Jo shook her fist at the sky. Ignoring her, the wind stole her scarf and blew out the light. Her plan was to be on a bus halfway to someplace else by now, but they weren't even close to the station. She pulled her mother to her feet. With a howl, the wind forced them off the road and into the prickly fields. The farm to her left belonged to an old man as unfriendly as the wind. Franklin Murdoch. His very name felt like a curse. The loss of his wife and only baby on a Christmas Eve long ago had turned him so crusty and mean, even grown-ups were afraid of him. Joe squinted toward Murdoch's barn. The old grouch won't be out on a night like this, she thought. Only those who are running from something would brave such a wind. Lean on me, Mom. There's a barn across the field. We'll start out again in the morning. Maybe you'll feel better. Maybe the wind will die. But when her mother steadied herself on Joe's shoulder, Joe feared she might drop her brother. "Okay," she said. "New plan. I'll get Christopher to the barn and come back for you. I'll be fast." The barn was farther away than it looked. The more the wind pushed, the more Joe stumbled. She said words she knew she wasn't allowed to say. Reaching the yard, she hid behind a tree. Noting the single light in the simple house, she darted to the barn faster than the wind itself. Well, it wasn't exactly warm inside. At least the wind couldn't find them in here. She wrapped her coat around her little brother and lay him in an empty manger. The cattle started lowing softly in the stalls around them, quiet braying, and the gentle baa of sheep joined in and rose above the stalls in a kind of lullaby. "Quiet yourselves," Joe whispered. The wind fought her all the way back to her mother. It jostled and bumped them as they limped and stopped and limped their way back to the barn. As she lay her mother in the hay, heat rushed to Joe's face. The manger was empty. "Where is he?" Joe eyed the cows. She darted from stall to stall and fished frantically through the hay, but Christopher was gone. Franklin Murdoch. This time Joe's words were a growl. Grabbing a shovel, she raged toward the house and peered through the window. Against the far wall, a wooden trunk spewed blankets and old photographs into the small room. An overturned bottle dripped milk off the edge of the table. The old man sat by the fire with his head in one hand and a crude wooden cradle at his feet.
Joe pushed away from the window. She charged the front door and banged on it with her fist. The wind held its breath long enough for her to hear movement inside, but the door didn't open. She hammered louder. This time, Murdoch opened the door a crack. Joe gripped the shovel like a weapon. "What are you doing with my shovel?" said Murdoch. "You stole our baby. Give him back right now or you'll be sorry." Murdoch frowned and reached for the shovel. She jerked it out of his reach. "Now!" "I didn't steal any baby," said Murdoch. "I saw him with my own 2 eyes." "That blasted wind carried his wailing right to my door," said Murdoch. "I saved him from freezing to death. What was he doing in my barn?" "None of your business." "My barn, my business. Just give him back," said Joe. "Where are your parents?" Murdoch asked. "Where do you live?" The wind shifted noisily as Joe looked the old man square in the face.
She pressed her lips together and scowled. "Well, you can't stay in my barn," Murdoch said. "Fine." Joe raised the shovel again. "Just give me my brother and we'll leave your precious barn." "That's not what I meant." He opened the door wider. "Come inside where it's warm. We'll figure things out in the morning." Joe eyed him suspiciously. "There's something else you need to know." Murdoch's eyebrows pinched into a single gray line. "And what would that be?" "My mother is sick." Joe gestured toward the barn with the shovel. The wind shoved Joe sideways, stealing feeling from her fingers and toes. It chased her with ghostly moans and creepy shrieks. The day before Christmas, and still no snow. She should have been glad, but the skinny road seemed colder without it. Joe hitched her baby brother higher on her hip. Leaving was the right thing to do, but the timing was bad. Her mother's eyes were slippery and her forehead shiny, and Christopher was still so new. The wind elbowed Joe's mother and kicked her to the ground.
"Stop it!"
Joe shook her fist at the sky. Ignoring her, the wind stole her scarf and blew out the light. Her plan was to be on a bus halfway to someplace else by now, but they weren't even close to the station. She pulled her mother to her feet. With a howl, the wind forced them off the road and into the prickly fields. The farm to her left belonged to an old man as unfriendly as the wind.
Franklin Murdoch.
His very name felt like a curse. The loss of his wife and only baby on a Christmas Eve long ago had turned him so crusty and mean, even grown-ups were afraid of him. Joe squinted toward Murdoch's barn.
"The old grouch won't be out on a night like this,"
she thought.
"Only those who are running from something would brave such a wind." "Lean on me, Mom. There's a barn across the field. We'll start out again in the morning. Maybe you'll feel better. Maybe the wind will die."
But when her mother steadied herself on Joe's shoulder, Joe feared she might drop her brother.
"Okay,"
she said.
"New plan. I'll get Christopher to the barn and come back for you. I'll be fast."
The barn was farther away than it looked. The more the wind pushed, the more Joe stumbled. She said words she knew she wasn't allowed to say. Reaching the yard, she hid behind a tree. Noting the single light in the simple house, she darted to the barn faster than the wind itself. Well, it wasn't exactly warm inside. At least the wind couldn't find them in here. She wrapped her coat around her little brother and lay him in an empty manger. The cattle started lowing softly in the stalls around them, quiet braying, and the gentle baa of sheep joined in and rose above the stalls in a kind of lullaby.
Quiet yourselves,
Joe whispered. The wind fought her all the way back to her mother. It jostled and bumped them as they limped and stopped and limped their way back to the barn. As she lay her mother in the hay, heat rushed to Joe's face. The manger was empty.
Where is he?
Joe eyed the cows. She darted from stall to stall and fished frantically through the hay, but Christopher was gone.
Franklin Murdoch.
This time Joe's words were a growl. Grabbing a shovel, she raged toward the house and peered through the window. Against the far wall, a wooden trunk spewed blankets and old photographs into the small room. An overturned bottle dripped milk off the edge of the table. The old man sat by the fire with his head in one hand and a crude wooden cradle at his feet. Joe pushed away from the window. She charged the front door and banged on it with her fist. The wind held its breath long enough for her to hear movement inside, but the door didn't open. She hammered louder. This time, Murdoch opened the door a crack. Joe gripped the shovel like a weapon.
What are you doing with my shovel?
Said Murdoch.
You stole our baby. Give him back right now or you'll be sorry.
Murdoch frowned and reached for the shovel. She jerked it out of his reach.
Now, I didn't steal any baby,
said Murdoch.
I saw him with my own 2 eyes. That blasted wind carried his way right to my door,
said Murdoch.
I saved him from freezing to death. What was he doing in my barn? None of your business. My barn, my business. Just give him back,
said Joe.
Where are your parents?
Murdoch asked.
Where do you live?
The wind shifted noisily as Joe looked the old man square in the face. She pressed her lips together and scowled.
Well, you can't stay in my bone,
Murdoch said.
Fine.
Joe raised the shovel again.
Just give me my brother and we'll leave your precious barn. That's not what I meant.
He opened the door wider.
Come inside where it's warm. We'll figure things out in the morning.
Joe eyed him suspiciously.
There's something else you need to know.
Murdoch's eyebrows pinched into a single gray line.
And what would that be? My mother is sick.
Joe gestured toward the barn with the shovel. As Murdoch leaned out to look, the wind snuck behind him. It shoved him into the yard and blew the barn door open. Joe raced to keep up. When Murdoch knelt beside her mother, muttering gruff words under his breath, she raised the shovel in warning.
It's the 3 of us or nothing. What are you doing out on a night like this anyway?
Murdoch struggled to his feet with Joe's mother in his arms.
Just be careful with her,
said Joe.
Tell me your names at least,
said Murdoch.
My mother's name is Mary. I'm Joe.
As they stepped into the rising storm, the wind blew both ways at once, and a path of light from a single star opened before them. Joe and Murdoch found themselves momentarily suspended between where they came from and where they were going, until an eager blast of air hurried them to the house. Joe tucked the shovel by the door and rushed to check on Christopher. Murdoch lay Mary on the couch by the fire and fetched some blankets.
She's had a bad cough for days,
said Joe.
Can you phone a doctor? I don't have a phone.
Murdoch glanced at the old photos, still scattered on the floor.
But even if I did, no one would help on Christmas Eve.
He turned his back on Joe and took a seat by the door. With his head in his hands, he stared at the floor.
What are you doing?
Joe planted herself in front of him.
You can't give up like that.
She swept her arm around the room.
Things won't get better on their own.
Murdoch lifted his head. The crumpled lines of his face rearranged themselves.
Yes, ma'am,
he said, standing. The wind prowled in circles around the house as Murdoch brought a cool cloth and some medicine for Mary. He warmed some soup for Joe and laid out some bread and cheese. Mary tossed in her sleep and whimpered. Christopher cried and then quieted. Together, Joe and Murdoch kept the two of them comfortable and the fire blazing. As the sky deepened from violet to indigo, thousands of stars watched over the house.
Why don't you rest, Joe?
Said Murdoch.
I'll stay up and keep watch. Wait.
Joe put a finger to her lips.
Listen.
Murdoch looked from the baby to Mary and then back at Joe.
The wind,
she said.
It stopped.
Silence swaddled the small room. As Joe and Murdoch looked out the window, delicate white flakes flew towards them like a host of angels. Joe yawned.
You know,
she said.
You're not really as horrible as they say.
Murdoch snorted.
I guess I could say the same about you. Who said I was horrible?
Said Joe. Murdoch winked. He made a nest of blankets by the fire and tucked Joe in. Through heavy lids, she watched him cross the room to the window. With one hand on the sill and the other on his hip, he stood for a long time looking out. When pale morning light slipped through the window, Joe opened her eyes. A scent, fresh like frost and crisp like fruit, mingled with the comfortable smell of the still crackling fire. Her brother made small sounds as he sucked on his fist. Her mother stirred and sighed. Murdoch slouched in a chair, bent sideways in sleep.
So,
thought Joe,
he didn't keep watch after all.
But then she looked around the room. Fresh cedar draped the window sills, and a Christmas tree leaned in the corner. Threads of straw wove like gold ribbon through the greenery, pinched in places by scraps of colored cloth tied into awkward bows. Silver spoons dangled from the branches, and presents, wrapped in newsprint, crowded beneath. Kneeling by the tree, Joe touched each package. One was shaped remarkably like the shovel she'd brandished the night before.
Merry Christmas, Joe,
Murdoch said from behind her.
Merry Christmas, Mr. Murdoch,
she whispered. Together, they opened the door and marveled at the blanket of snow the Christmas wind had blown in. The world that stretched before them looked fresh and new.
If you and your children or your students would like to participate in this literacy project yourself, there are 2 ways to do that. First, you can simply go to christmaswindstoryproject.com, and if you click where shown, I've put up the 8 parts of the story that you can simply listen to on your own. Alternatively, I have a special module I conduct with schools you can check out by clicking this button. Everything you need to know about the module is here, including how it works and what you get when you participate in this way. When you go through the project with me, through this module, you get a special class webpage where I'll upload the 8 parts of the story week by week. Because I'll ask you to scan and send me your students' illustrations each week, I'll also create and upload a little movie of their illustrations to the words of the story with sound effects added, and I'll do this week by week. You'll also get tons of additional surprise content that I'll add week by week that the kids from the original project loved. At the end of the project, I'll send your school a signed copy of the actual book. I'll also send a goodie bag for each participating student with Christmas Wind Story Project trading cards and a Christmas Wind craft. Additionally, your students will have the opportunity to connect with me throughout the 9 weeks of the project via back and forth comments on their private class page. That means when they write to me with a question or comment, I'll write back. They can even send me voicemails via a special app on their class page. Your students will love it, and I promise we'll have fun. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed and got inspiration from what I've shared. The website again to learn more about this project is www.christmaswindstoryproject.com. My main website, where you can learn more about me, is www.stephaniemclellan.com, and you can contact me directly by emailing me at stephanie@stephaniemclellan.com. Again, thanks for watching, and bye for now.